Oh, yes, another Big Brother video since it's that time of year. Now, for season 23, because of the alliance, the Cookout, which is a race based all black alliance, which has created some controversy, race has been a focal point of the discussion in terms of this year's show. Now, in defense of the Cookout, yes, in terms of strategy and voting patterns and so forth, there has been an anti-white slant. But fortunately, I have not seen or heard of any bullying on the part of the cookout toward white or non-black players. Like on a personal level, things have been fairly cordial, which is good. But it hasn't always been that way on Big Brother. In fact, there's one specific example of racially based bullying that I want to discuss today. And no, it's not Aaron Grace and the argument she had with the two blacks that season, because everyone talked about that and has been talking about it ever since, and that dead horse has been beaten to death. But one case of racially biased bullying, which people never talk about, is season 20 when Bailey was a black woman, um, screamed violently at Tyler when they were having an argument. And the argument spun out of control to the point where Bailey was screaming at him hysterically, violently. In fact, watching it live, you would have thought that she was just about ready to attack him physically. It was actually quite disturbing, and she basically held a grudge against him for the rest of the season to the very end, where Tyler ended up in the final two, and predictably, Bailey cast a vote for his opponent, which isn't a surprise. But of course, Tyler didn't have a chance at her vote, not just because they had that argument, but because there was some racial bias in the mix. Because now CBS, of course, ignored this like it didn't happen, but there was a conversation between Rockstar and Bailey where Bailey says to Rockstar, and I quote, "Well, gee, Rockstar, you hate white people just as much as I do." Huh? She hates white people, huh? Well, maybe that explains why she attacked Tyler with such venom. Now, of course, race isn't the only reason she hated Tyler. There's sure other reasons as well. But you'd be very naive and foolish to think that race wasn't part of the equation. After all, she said she hated white people. And based on her behavior, I believe it. Now, the next season after, or the season after that, they had a semi all star season in which CBS cast both Tyler and Bailey together again. Now, why would CBS do that? Maybe they're hoping that Bailey would physically attack him this time. I don't know. And I don't like the concept of all star seasons, because usually a player ends up looking worse the second time around on average. There are exceptions, but usually that's the case. Now with Bailey, she actually looked better the second time around. Tyler, on the other hand, did not look better the second time around. In fact, he looked far worse. And this had everything to do with Bailey. Now, during the second season, the All Star season, Tyler came up with this bonehead idea that for the sake of social justice, that he was going to give up his game, volunteer to go up on the block and get voted out, so that Bailey and this other black lady could advance in their game. In other words, trying to be woke, trying to impress everyone with this woke anti-white BS. Now, did Bailey appreciate this gesture? Well, no, she didn't. She thought he was being as fake as a $3 bill, and basically let him know that. And Tyler finally came to his senses and realized that, hey, he was basically casting his pearls to the swine. But why would he come up with this bonehead idea in the first place? Well, I think I can give you some insight on that. I think Tyler was so concerned with the optics of having a public feud with a black woman that he was afraid that could be perceived the wrong way, that he could be perceived as the R word somehow, just by on the basis of having a feud with this woman of a particular race. When in reality, that even if, okay, let's say even if Bailey was completely in the right and Tyler was completely in the wrong, which I don't believe, but let's just assume that for the sake of this discussion. When they had that violent argument, well, even if Bailey was completely right, she still overreacted to the point where she came across as this unhinged, potentially violent sociopath. And that's assuming she was right. But yet, in the All-Star season, it was Tyler that apologized to her. Huh? Well, like I said, even if he was wrong initially, the way she screamed at him, I think she was the one that needed to be apologizing to him. And she voted for his opponent to win. Now, this is significant because Tyler's opponent in the final two was a Filipino woman. And not so coincidentally, both Bailey and Rockstar, who said that they hated white people, voted for the Filipino woman over Tyler. Which means that Tyler basically lost $450,000 because of his race. Or at least in part because of his race. Just judging by the words coming out of the mouths of both Bailey and Rockstar, and based on Bailey's behavior. So here Tyler is in the second season, willing to sacrifice his game for a woman who screamed at him violently, was this close to getting physically violent, and voted against him, costing him $500,000. And did whatever she could to influence other jury members to vote the same way. It's like, well, why would he do that? That doesn't make any sense. Because this woman had nothing but contempt for him. And it just shows you that because he was so afraid, so concerned about being perceived in a certain way, in other words, being perceived as the R word, that he was willing to give up $500,000 to a woman that hated him. Which just illustrates how insidious this phenomenon of anti-whiteism is. How it just completely corrupts white people's minds to the point where they won't even stand up for themselves, and to they'll go as far as to try to advance people that hate them.